All right. Good evening, everyone. Let's get underway. So thank you all for coming, and let's begin with apologies. I'm aware of an apology from Councillor Railton, new Councillor Railton, and also from Councillor Coyne, who has Councillor Hunt substituting. Do we have any other apologies? No other apologies. Fantastic. Item 2, declarations of interest. Would anybody like to declare an interest in anything on the agenda this evening? I don't see any declarations of interest. Item 3, Chair's announcements. I don't have anything to announce particularly, so I'll move right along. Item 4, minutes. Does anybody wish to comment on the minutes of the previous meeting? I don't see any comments, so in that case, is everybody happy to approve the minutes? I see silence, not even nods, but give us a nod, go on. I will take this. A cheeky nod, I would say, from Chris J there. So I think we can take them as approved. All right, item 5, work plan. So there is something to discuss here. So the question is, what do we want to review at the November edition of the main Scrutiny Committee? There are 4 possibilities before us. Those being grant allocations, the West End and Osney Mead SPD, wave 2.1 of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, and the procurement strategy. So out of those 4, to me, I would say that the West End and Osney Mead SPD sort of jumps out as something that is very likely to be something we ought to consider. And then out of the other 3, my thinking was that the only one that stuck out as maybe one to eliminate and give us 3 reports to consider rather than 4 would be the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, just because it is wave 2.1 of a scheme that has, that has already begun, and which has, I believe, been examined in the past. But does anybody want to comment about relative desire to look at grant allocations versus the next wave of the decarbonisation fund versus the procurement strategy?
Does that mean the grant will come? Yes, this normally should.
I was suggesting that we should look at grant allocations, West End and Osney Mead, procurement strategy, meaning that the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund Wave 2.1 wouldn't be considered. Okay, I don't see any further comments, in which case I suggest we should do that. Right, in which case we can move on in pretty good time to item 6, the development brief for the Botley Road retail park. We have Councillor Hollingsworth along with Arome and Amanda Ford. So who would like to kick off? Shall I hand over to Councillor Hollingsworth first of all? Sorry, hang on a second. Yes, sorry, it's pointed out I should mention that we have a late received email that was sent in by Councillor Pressel, sent in a correspondence from a resident raising particular issues with the scheme. I'll just briefly sum up what they wrote. So the email, it made some representations to the committee and set out concerns about access and movement, sharing services, hours of operation, numbers, flooding, and design, which is obviously quite a long list of things. I imagine that probably encompasses the entire document. Anybody who hasn't seen it, we do have hard copies of it here, though it has been sent to all members of the committee earlier today, as well as to Councillor Hollingsworth and to officers. So just to make everybody aware that there is this late-breaking piece of correspondence and copies of it are available. All right, at that point, I will hand over to Councillor Hollingsworth to introduce the scheme, please.
Thank you, and I think it's probably very important to emphasise it's not a scheme. It's a development brief, and actually I think that that's a helpful way of sort of introducing why we're doing this. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the what we call the retail sheds on the Botley Road, a series of large retail units which were allowed, some against decisions made by this council, were allowed on appeal by government over a period, mostly in the 1990s, late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, one particularly large development. And they are, I think, not contributing significantly to the positive functions of the city. Obviously, they are useful for a degree of shopping, but they are very car-centric, and that drives an awful lot of traffic onto the already crowded Botley Road. Obviously, in architectural and planning and design terms, they are fairly lowest common denominator, as you'd expect from the kind of uses. The issue is that the government has been making a number of changes to the planning system, and those who've been following the news today will have seen that their latest wheeze is to abolish social housing and regard any environmental concerns as red tape, which are to be done away with. We'll see whether that survives contact with reality. But that's a kind of sequence of changes that the government has been making. One of those changes is some very sweeping alterations to the use classes. So those of you who sit on planning committee, who've been familiar with planning committee, will know that different uses of buildings have in the past come under different classes. So a house is different to an HMO, an office is different to a workshop, and so on and so forth. And we've built quite a lot of policies around that, particularly our policies protecting retail areas, so trying to keep shops in shopping areas and things like that. The changes that have been introduced effectively abolish the difference between a retail premises and an office. There's more detail than that, but that's essentially what they do. So the buildings which we used to call retail sheds are now places in which people can work, which means that you could, if you didn't want to change the outside of the building, effectively turn it into an office, any one of those buildings, without needing planning permission of any sort. Now, what that has coincided with is an interest from developers in the city and in looking at employment space, particularly laboratory space. You could say that's kind of to some extent a response to what was already happening, and in to some extent it's a response to things like the Oxford vaccine and so on and so forth. So what we're trying to do here with this brief is to preempt those planning applications. We've already had 2 which have been approved, and there is 1 which has been submitted and is currently subject to consultation and hasn't been decided. And I think quite a number of the comments in the piece of correspondence which has been received are actually referring to that development scheme rather than to this development brief. And it's very important that the planning committee has not yet had a chance to consider that, and we're not going to offer any comment at all on that scheme, its merits or otherwise, and that wouldn't be appropriate for anyone here to do that either who's sitting on the planning committee. So what we're trying to do is to preempt these applications which are beginning to come in, because it is now possible to do so under the use class, and to try and turn what has been something of a problem area in planning terms, because it was allowed against the better judgment of the council. The car parking is massively above what we would expect to see for places which are 10 minutes walk from the city centre and on a major public transport route, and to try and guide it towards a redevelopment opportunity which makes the best of what we can do there. 2 critical things to finish with. One is that this is a development brief. It is not changing our existing planning policy 1 iota. And that's something that's really important for everyone, whether it's a landowner or an applicant or or this committee or anyone else to understand we're not changing our planning policies. We could not do that. If we wanted to change planning policies, we would have to have some kind of supplementary planning document and go through the proper formal processes of consultation. This is simply trying to lay out what the impact of our existing planning policies applied here, given these changes of circumstance, would be. So that's a really important thing to get right. We cannot use this document to change planning policy, and irrespective of whether we wish to or not. And the second thing is to bear in mind is that the substantial majority of this site is in the functional floodplain, which under national planning policy means it cannot be used for residential development. And there are, I think there's one small island which would be developable, but it will be surrounded, I think, by functional floodplain on which residential development is forbidden under national planning policy. So that's the why we're doing it. I think, Arame, are you going next? You're poised. Arame is going to say what we're doing.
Okay, so just to follow up on what Alex has said, what we're doing. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Yeah. So what we're doing, the development brief, is just to basically provide guidance for landowners who are who have schemes to bring forward on the site, and also just to give a bit of guidance to members of the public, to development management officers, and also any other interested parties, just to give a bit of transparency on the relevant planning policies that apply on the site, the the constraints that could restrict any development on the site. Like Alex mentioned, he talked about the flood risk areas that are on the site. So just to basically highlight those, and also to give almost like an overarching sort of vision of the opportunities that are possible on the site as well. So looking at the possibilities for just improving the quality of space there, the street scene, and just better uses or better potential uses for the site itself. So like Alex says, it's not it doesn't have any new policies. It doesn't propose any changes to the policies that we have. It just identifies 3 areas that we know that are problematic matters on the site itself. So it talks about the issue of land use, access and movement, and also design and layout. So it just basically identifies these as areas of deficiency and just tries to bring almost like create a vision for what could be possible on the site and how the current situation could be improved, basically. So that's basically what it does. So that's the overarching purpose for it, and it's just to almost like to guide the process for development, so that any schemes that come through could use this as a material consideration for any scheme that appears on the site. There, it doesn't compel or have any sort of specific requirements in terms of appearance or size. It just sets out, almost like creates a template for the current policies for what could go on the site and how any applications would be assessed on the site itself. So I think those are the main points, I think. And was there anything else I wanted to? Okay, yeah. So just one thing that I just need to mention: it is not a statutory document, so there wasn't a formal consultation on this particular brief itself. But what there is now is that there is a consultation going on for the local plan, and this area is one of the areas which are under consideration within the local plan consultation itself. So it's not a site allocation. I think it's an area of focus. So it basically just gives almost like an outline, or proposes to have this as one of the sites where there's guiding principles for any development that comes onto the site or within the area. So if there are any comments that anyone wants to make on this particular site, it's possible to do that through the local plan consultation. So the fact that we haven't consulted on this formally because of the state of the document is not required, but there is an opportunity for people to make a comment on the site itself and on the brief itself, which we have mentioned in the local plan consultation itself. So it's not a secret, it's not consigned from anyone. So it is open and it is possible to make an input into this at the moment. So yeah, I think that was the main. Yeah, I think that bit pretty much sums up everything, and we'll try to answer any questions that you put forward to us. Yeah.
Amanda, do you wish to add anything at this point, or shall we move straight on to questions? Cool, brilliant. All right, first of all, Arame, I'm very sorry for misnaming you at the beginning. Who would like to ask a question? Let's start with Councillor Valli-Simmers, please.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. This representation from the resident of the ward said that there hasn't been any formal or informal discussion with the local resident. Is that because there hasn't been any public consultation yet, or is just a document, like a template?
It's because it's not changing anything. So that's the reason. I mean, we issue quite a number of these technical advice notes on a range of things. I think we've got about, a dozen or so sitting on our website. Because this one affects a fairly large area and is kind of new, we're bringing it to Cabinet just so you can see it being adopted. Quite often we just kind of update them as and when required, but it isn't proposing any changes. It's collating what's already there, essentially. So it would be an odd thing to consult on a document that couldn't change anything, because what would we be asking people to do? I'm sure people would want it to change policy, but we couldn't do it through this document. So it's better to do the consultation through the emerging local plan, and indeed through the planning application, where obviously there's public consultation on the planning application.
So there will be a public consultation once it's made, it's finalised. Yeah, everything is finalised.
Yeah, shall I just help clarify? So how we if this is kind of almost, it's a development brief for the here and now, like a material consideration, but it can help feed into the evidence base, so we can assess whether this should be a specific site allocation or, as Arame was saying, an area of focus. So, and of course that will go out to consultation. So there's so much change there, so we felt this was an opportunity to provide some guidance, so hence we've got this now. But there's also, because so much work's gone into this, it does form a very good piece of evidence as we start to draft that if that policy should it be found that there is a need for a specific site allocation. Does that help? Kind of in the 2040 plan.
So I heard from Councillor Mundy, and give us a wave if you've got a question afterwards. Councillor Mundy, please.
Thank you. Okay, so the site's obviously very close to the Vale of Whitehorse. I just wondered whether there's any conversations happening with either the councillors or the administration at Vale of Whitehorse Council, because obviously it's going to be a relevant site for people who live there. I'm not saying, obviously it's obviously in the city, but the consideration of what they're doing there could be relevant, and also it could be impacting on them in relation to parking. I think this is actually pointed out in this letter with regards to potentially the misuse of parking in neighbouring streets if there isn't obviously parking on the site. The report obviously cites the fact that it's very close to the A34. It's got the ambitions of being a low parking or no parking site, but it does also point out about the A34 and how that makes it strategically useful. And I just, I think that it's important to kind of get the messaging right, really, in terms of being clear about the ambitions of being no parking and how that's actually going to be achieved in relation to the local area. And I think that's all I've got at the moment. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, like I said, for this particular document, I think it's quite narrow and specific in scope, I think, because there's no since this is not proposing a scheme or a master, or it's not a master plan as such. So, and also because it's just a guidance document based on how we are interpreting current policies at the moment. So with that level of detail, like what's mentioned in the letter, it is something which can be addressed when it comes to an actual specific plan application and plan scheme that comes through. This just discusses more like the aspirations for that particular area and nothing else. So I think it's not quite at the scope where it would involve local authorities. Now, on the other hand, when you come to the fact that we are going to have this as part of the consultation for the local plan itself, that is the forum that any neighboring authority or any large institution can actually make an input into it, and that'll be more likely to have an impact on what actually happens there than this current document in itself, I think. So.
And just picking up on the parking, I mean, the parking issue is clearly one of the great opportunities here, because what we've got at the moment is retail uses which generate a substantial amount of vehicle movement, because it goes on all day, basically. So if those kinds of uses are replaced with office space or particularly with laboratory space, which is what the biggest demand for is, and based on the property market, is clearly the thing that is going to generate most money for landowners, and that's what therefore they're going to be looking at. Those are relatively low intensity in terms of car use, and particularly when you think it's on public transport routes. There's a railway station potentially connected to the Cowley branch line, and increasingly connected towards Cambridge and so on. So there's lots of opportunities there, and that's 10 minutes walk away from here. You've got buses. It's not quite as frequent as the Cowley Road, but it is pretty frequent up the Botley Road, heading into the Vale of Whitehorse and to the city centre. So there's and obviously opportunities for improving and improved cycle routes. There's been some improvements the County Council have made. They could be better, and there's obviously in the brief talk about how you could link up with this sort of emerging set of routes which are going through Oseney Mead and so to the south of the site, which is completely off road and would be an excellent piece of new and emerging cycle infrastructure. The County Council were consulted, and there's quite extensive comments from them in Appendix 2, so you can see what they've said on that, which is quite helpful. The other comments, well, I mean, you can see why I emphasised we weren't going to change policy, because you can read that some of our landowners wish us to, and we're not prepared to.
Yeah, please do.
So in relation to the employment sites, do we have any sort of sites similar to what this one could be, that we can compare it to in terms of how people actually do get to work and commute to work? Because anecdotally, people do drive to work quite a lot, including to these kind of science park sites. So I'd just like to know if that's something that's been looked into.
I think the close comparisons would probably be the Old Road campus, potentially. There's also the science park as well. That's in terms of sort of like precedents of what we used. Those were the two of the main ones that we sort of like had as almost like standards that we could work towards. And when it comes to things like the actual detail, like a separation from the neighboring residences and the potential for connection to actual routes, those definitely fed into the thinking that we have behind this. Yeah.
I think in terms of distance from the city centre, the university science area would be the obvious one. It's about 10 minutes walk from the city centre going north as opposed to going west. So the science area itself would be an obvious comparison.
I'll come to Councillor Jarvis next, and then back to Nadine. Yeah, okay, fine. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. The Science Park, they are extending the Science Park, as you know, but they are securing 770 car spaces for people who are going to work there. So I don't know, how does it tally with no car development? So when I asked the question to the people who were doing the presentation, they were saying that people come from far away, and there was absolutely no way that these people were not going to be able to use their cars. So it has an impact reducing the car spaces might have an impact on people who come from far away or different places. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's an element of Mandy Rice Davis going on that they would say that, wouldn't they? With them, so I'd be interesting to see how the policy proposition for the science park evolves in the 2040 local plan, given the direction of travel, coin a bad phrase, of both the city and county councils. The difference here is that while the promoters of the science park, have a case that the current public transport options aren't brilliant, though the proposals the county council are making should see that improve. That is not the case on the Botley Road, where the public transport is absolutely excellent, and so it's a quite, I think from the transport point of view, it's quite a different site. I mean, obviously we're not talking about the science park here, but in terms of the difference of the locations, this is absolutely prime walking, cycling, and public transport link. It's ideally positioned from that point of view.
Okay, now we'll come to Councillor Jarvis, and then Councillor Pegg, and then Councillor Altaf Khan.
Grand, yeah. I have a few kind of related questions, and they all kind of peg around the question of housing. And then in the tail end of your initial comments, Alex, you said that there was a small island of the site which the flood risk is sufficiently low that there could be that housing development could be permitted. So I guess I just wanted to question whether there's sort of scope in the immediate term for part of the site that you mentioned to be used for housing. The second question I have is in relation to, I guess, a comparative question in relation to the Oseney Mead site, because my understanding of that is that there's a similar level of flood risk on the Oseney Mead site, and yet housing has been permitted there. So it'd be good to get clarification on what the difference is there. And then finally, the flood alleviation scheme is mentioned in the papers, but it's mentioned in relation to the intention of the scheme rather than the impact of the scheme. So it refers to the scheme being meant to protect existing settlements only, but it would be good to get an understanding of how this design brief intersects with the future of flood risk in the area in terms of what the impact of the flood alleviation scheme is. So if the flood alleviation scheme goes ahead, will more of that site be theoretically available for housing?
Yeah, I could probably take it. So I'll start with the flood alleviation scheme. The advice that we got from the Environment Agency was basically, as you said, that the flood alleviation scheme is only designed to protect existing settlements. So it's not going to, they advise us strongly that we shouldn't consider it as a way of reducing the flood risk level of a particular area. So flood zone 3 is not going to turn to a flood zone 2 because of this scheme, basically. So that's that. And also when it comes to the island of land that was mentioned about. The thing that we have to think about for flood risk is not just the actual flooding itself, but also the possibility of safe access and safe egress. So with that particular site, there is basically going to be in a catastrophic flooding event. You just have that a strip of land which is basically cut off, which does not allow dry access to a safe higher ground, basically. So for people who might be mobility impaired or not able to move, it's not really a good situation to be. And it will also also add additional burden for actually trying to rescue people and save people who are stuck in that kind of situation. And so that's in very simple terms, that's basically what it is. So it's just not going to be a safe way to actually have actual housing there, which is open to all. When it comes to things, to housing where you can control who comes in and who you can have like a specific evacuation plan for, that's a different thing. But for normal open access housing, it's not something which would be suitable for this site, basically. So.
There's a map on page 38 for people who are interested. You can see the island, and it's the discussion of the safe egress issue. So essentially, you could put under existing national and local planning policies, if you ignored the flood issue, I think housing would be allowed there, but I think if somebody came forward with a planning application for housing there, the Environment Agency would block it on the grounds that there's no safe egress.
So, yeah, Chris, do you want to follow up?
Sorry, yeah,
Go
just
ahead.
there was a second question there around the comparison with the Oseney Mead site. Yeah.
Safe egress, the Environment Agency deemed that there is a safe egress from Oseney Mead. And it would be, as Arame said, the proposal there is particularly around controlled was the word you used, wasn't it? Where you'd be some kind of control of the occupancy. So if somebody with a disability or some mobility issue was in there, it would be as a tenant of a particular landlord or landowner, and they would need to have a particular evacuation plan for that individual. So there would need to be that, and that's what's currently proposed for Oseney Mead.
So I had a very similar question, which I might as well now pose as a follow-up rather than revisit the topic much later. So on the specific question of whether OFAS changes the picture with regards to either the land itself or access, the documentation on the gov.uk website of the OFAS intended benefits does publish a before and after flood zone map. They're very low in detail, but the impression given is that it may well put you in a position where you have safe egress. So, I mean, it's far from certain from what's been printed whether or not that's actually the case, but it will surely have some effect on what the flood zones are is all I'm saying. So
I think you're right. It might. The Environment Agency changes its maps as well, irrespective of schemes. So it just updates them. So I mean, I can say that from a personal point of view. My house was not in a flood risk area, and then the Environment Agency changed the map, and now it is. So these things happen. The point is, I think that this development brief is setting out existing policy to help developers who are bringing forward schemes in compliance with policies in our current local plan. So that local plan will run to, assuming the 2040 local plan runs to a reasonable timetable, the government doesn't abolish the planning system in the interim, we'd be looking to adopt in 24, 25 or thereabout. I can't remember the date off the top of my head, whatever it is that we said in our LDS. OFAS isn't going to come online until the late 2020s, probably around 2030. So there is nothing to prevent a landowner bringing forward a scheme now, and that's what this is doing. So we could speculate on what OFAS might or might not do, but it isn't going to be relevant to any planning application that comes forward now, is the issue. We couldn't turn down a planning application for a laboratory now if it was something that passed all the tests in our current policies, because there might be a possibility of some housing in 2030, but wouldn't be possible. We'd lose it on appeal. So there's no point trying to set out a policy in this which would do that.
Sure, yeah. I suppose what I'm saying is it surprises me that in the doc, it basically, to paraphrase, seems to say OFAS wasn't meant for that, which seems irrelevant. It seems like surely the thing which is relevant is what it does, not what it's meant for. And therefore the site, I think it's sort of one of those passive voice has been deemed, where the action of deeming is not attributed to any particular person or organ, but it has been deemed by some unspecified body that it is unsuitable. It seems to me, shouldn't we? Yes, please.
Well, just because I went and we discussed this quite at length with the Environment Agency with the 2036 plan. So I suppose I'm just coming at. So I mean, Ray is correct in what the advice we had then was exactly what we've just said. I think I have looked recently at what they've got on there, and the story seems to be changing. So I think, which we will deal with when it, as Councillor Hollingsworth said, when it's implemented, and so we will change accordingly. But the Kieran now is that this is not suitable in that respect for housing, because
And it's the Environment Agency that's doing the deeming.
Yeah.
Apologies for the passive voice.
Yes.
Let's be completely clear. The Environment Agency, or the statutory body who have a veto, have deemed it not suitable.
Okay, so then would a sensible thing to write be, well, to write that down? Because at the moment it's just a sort of it's just vague on the topic. Basically.
I think we will remove as much passive voice as possible and assign actions to subjects.
Sounds good to me. Okay. Yes, and I like attribution. Voices I don't mind. Has been deemed by is also fine. I'm aware I'm jumping the queue. Apologies for that. Councillor Pegg, please.
Yeah, I just had some questions around heights of buildings in the plan. I think that's one of the things that existing residents nearby are concerned about is how much taller potential future buildings could be. So one question was just to get some clarification on, it seems like in the site plan, higher buildings are being allowed nearer the residential side of it, whereas there's a lower maximum building height on the side, which is facing what's mainly fields and stuff. So just would like some clarification about why that was happening that way round, as it seems like you're putting the buildings that residents are going to object to nearer to them. The other thing was around, sorry, I'm just trying to read my notes. Yes, around like changing footprints of buildings. I think if I'm understanding correctly, you can't expand a footprint of a building because it's in a flood zone, and because of some of the flood things around that. I might have misunderstood. But was wondering, how does that work if you're getting rid of car parking space? Could the buildings therefore be not as tall but have a bigger footprint, but ultimately not actually be having a bigger footprint if you were taking into the car park that is being got rid of as part of this plan? I feel like I've explained that not very clearly, but yeah. Yeah, and then also just on the heights as well, could there be some kind of element of this plan which would put a lower height limit on those buildings which are near the residential area side of the development?
Okay, it's on now. There are a number of questions in that, so I'll try and cover as many as I can remember, and then we'll see how we go from there. On the footprints, yes, you're right. The issue is the floods. The guidance is very clear. You can't increase the footprint on that. Clearly, were a landowner be very desperate to expand the footprint and then to enter into talks with the Environment Agency and come up with some kind of alleviation approach, which might involve either tanks underneath. That's been done on a small scale in Osney, for example, and on a wider scale, and it's not in our patch, it's in Vale of Whitehorse. The Mims estate is mostly designed to flood, so water can go through it. It's one of those kind of permeable, is that the right word? Anyway, so basically there's nothing on the ground floor that can be affected by flood. So if there is a flood, it can all swoosh through. And so that actually is quite an effective one. That's a model they use obviously use it in lots of different countries, but I think they use it in York, for example, where there's propensity for flooding and stuff. So, but those kinds of approaches, they're open to any landowner to follow up. But as a general rule, you're right. We wouldn't want to see the expansion of the footprints. The reason for the heights being where they are guided by our existing policies. So our existing policies include the view cones. They'll include how you do edges of development, particularly where they're up against green areas, and that's what's to the south here. So rather than having a stark tall set of buildings immediately onto the meadows, Hinksey Meadows going south, isn't it? So the Hinksey Meadows going south, and what are some quite important pieces of landscape and view. We're aiming for the lower ones there and the taller buildings near the existing built-up area. And of course, some of the sheds already are pretty large. Now, if you look at Appendix 2, you will see some of the comments from some of the landowners clearly think the opposite to the way you were suggesting, and think that 3 and 4 stories is very limiting and is going to be a constraint and it's going to be very difficult. So I think when you've been sort of, when you've got sort of criticism from both sides, you might be somewhere about right, I think is one of those. But that's the logic of it. So it's in terms of an urban design approach, which is reflecting the need for kind of a softer edge where it adjoins onto the green undeveloped areas. And the last bit was about what to do with the landscaping. And at the moment, what we have with the car parking is mostly completely impermeable, concrete, tarmac, whatever, paving. If we can't put buildings on it, then clearly making it permeable, making it planted, making it bicycle parking, using the opportunity for bicycle parking with green roofs or generating roofs, all those sorts of things. All of these are opportunities which I think are ones which I would want to see taken up. And in fact, I checked, sorry, the first application was a single application for 2 buildings, not two. No, I said 2 planning applications. But those are the kinds of opportunities I think we could look at. But getting rid of the tarmac and having something more attractive, more biodiverse and more flood friendly would be a step in the right direction.
And just to add to that, on page 21, figure 9, in the opportunities diagram, that just gives a very diagrammatic sketch of the potential for, like Councillor sort of said about permeable features and just ways that we could reuse the landscape in a way that doesn't involve a lot of hard standing on it.
Councillor Pegg, any follow-up?
Yeah, just a quick one. So there isn't a way to take into account the fact that overall you might be not having any more building footprint if you were getting rid of some car park, but it might mean that the building was bigger, but but overall you've kind of like taken some of the car park into the building footprint space. In the overall picture, if that makes sense. Is that not something that can happen, or is that something that has to kind of be explored as like an exceptional circumstance?
Explored as an exceptional circumstance. It's not precluded, but it would require technical negotiation with the Environment Agency. It's not impossible, but they would need to say they approved.
Okay, I will come to Councillor Altaf Khan, is to my knowledge the only person waiting to speak, unless anybody else wants to wave. All right, Altaf, please go ahead.
It says here, and as Alex already said, it's not part of 2036 local plan allocation, but it is a brief in 2040 local plan, which is up for consultation, I believe, and I don't remember when the consultation is over. So does the, sorry? Mid-November. Does the new application or the planning application have to wait for this local plan brief, or they can put any time and the people will have a sort of say in the planning application process, not really in the local plan, if that they don't have to wait? That's my first question, if you can explain.
Can we just clarify? Yeah, just to be completely clear on this. This is a brief which is setting out the existing policies, but how they apply to this site. So this is 2036 local plan policies to help landowners negotiate a planning application under the 2036 local plan. We are currently consulting on the 2040 local plan, but that's started last Monday. So we've only just started that consultation at Regulation 18 stage, which is preferred options. It runs through to November. it's essentially not a material consideration at this stage. We're not far enough through the 2040 local plan. So any planning applications submitted now or for the next 12, 18 months, I would have thought, is going to be considered under the 2036 local plan, not the 2040. Once the 2040 local plan is in its final stages, then it begins to be a material consideration, but it's still not as important as the 2036 local plan. Only at the point where the council adopts the new local plan does that become more important and the previous local plan fall away.
So that means the 2040 will take a couple of years. So that means, as you said, in existing 2036 people or the landowner owner or anybody else who wants to build, they can put the planning application. My other, which is very sort of, I don't know how, but tricky question, but this is a part of this thinking of the LTN and the bus gates and everything, where we're trying to sort of reduce, or we are anti-private cars. Is that part of that, or this has got nothing to do with that? Because this, to a general public, your public will consider this county, city, and to a political party, which we are here in city and county, well, three. The third one, they are all part of this all LTN bus gates, and now as the city, put their sleeves up and trying to fasten their policy procedures and things. Is this part of that, or has it got nothing to do with that?
What it is part of is the policies which are set out in our local plan 2036, and indeed for all our preceding local plans and documents on planning and traffic policy back to the early 1970s, and the balanced transport strategy, and also the county council's recently adopted LCTP5. I can never remember what it is, but one that says they want to reduce traffic. So yes, it is part of a broad strategic effort that's been going for 50 years to curb, reduce the amount of car-borne traffic in and around the city of Oxford. That's so yes, it's not new. It's 50 years. No, I'm not 50 anymore. I'm more than 50. It's more than 50 years old, basically. That's made me feel very geriatric.
Just to follow up, I think Alex and me, we are the same age and same year, but it seems this Rainbow Coalition is going quite fast, and I have served 8 years in county and sort of decades in the city, but it seems the situations which you are saying is going on for decades, but it is speeded up since a year or 2 years.
I think that's both true and long overdue.
All right. First of all, I'd like to clarify the Liberal Democrats definitely do recognise the Green Party. Hello, guys. Secondly, is there anybody else waiting to speak? Otherwise, I have a couple of quick questions, and then we should hammer out some recommendations and move along. I don't see any waving hands, in which case... So, quick question number one is a couple of these are from, I don't know if you'd had a chance to read our correspondence email. There seemed like a couple of points there we could clear up, probably in their favour. They mentioned being surprised to find the car park at the top of Earl Street, at the route of Earl Street, where it meets Botley Road, inside I'm going to call it a site boundary. I appreciate it's not a site boundary because it's not a planning application, but you see what I mean, the boxed zone on the map. We don't seem to say anything about the Earl Street car park or venture any suggestions about it. Is there any reason why we couldn't simply draw the line around that as not relevant to what we're describing?
I think obviously the site has is quite a complicated patchwork of ownerships and to which we found quite hard to almost detangled. So we weren't, all we just wanted to just work with was just the actual red line boundary of what falls within that retail park. We weren't going to go into the specifics. We didn't really have in mind any current applications or any proposals. We just saw that as the actual demarcated boundary of the park itself. I
think it's basically all the non-residential. So anything. So it draws the red line around the edge of the residential. So it's a logical one. It would seem a bit odd to leave it out. I mean, it doesn't imply anything.
So I haven't visited on foot, so I might be wrong about this, but it appears to be a little car park which is accessible from Earl Street, and which is not accessible from the retail park side, if that's right. If so, then it seems like it's much more relevant to the housing on Earl Street, which obviously is not at all relevant to this advice note, and not at all relevant to the retail park, which obviously is. Does that seem reasonable?
I think to help put at mind the correspondent from Earl Street, with whom I am extremely familiar, I think we could probably change that red line without. Can we change that red line without? Yeah, we'll just change the red line by the time it gets to cabinet. So you're gonna have to redo the image. Sorry.
It seems sensible. It's the MS Paint flood fill of the car parks, which seems like kind of what we're trying to do here. Okay, and then the other one was, there was a line about in the text about intended access diverting traffic towards the residential on Brook Grove at the very southern end of the southeastern corner of the site. I don't think that didn't seem like it would be the case from what was written, but I wondered if you'd noticed that particular concern, if you could offer any clarification.
I didn't think it was going to do that. We are operating at a fairly strategic level. That's quite tactical. So I think we probably would say that it's the kind of issue which would be picked up in detail on any planning application, I think, for that part. And County Council's made some comments on the number of entrances and egresses, which I think it wants to reduce them because the multiple different entrances and egresses are a risk for cyclists and they're disruptive for public transport. So they've made comments, but I don't recollect anything on that particular one right in the corner there. So I'd probably say it's fine.
All right, the official word of the council is it'll be fine.
In the light of the evidence available to us at this time,
we believe it'll be fine. Good. Okay, fine. That seemed likely, but I couldn't really make head or tail of it, so I just wanted to see whether anyone else had done so. All right, and one very, very last thing is we've oscillated between referring to this as a brief and a technical advice note. Does that make any difference? Are they synonymous for our purposes?
No. I had noticed we'd been a bit lax. It's a development brief which will form a technical advice note, so it is one and the same thing. We should probably be clearer about that, and I think we should put technical advice note on the front cover in order to make sure it's quite clear that is its status and it has no other status, so it's not pretending to be an SPD or an AAP.
Cool. Okay. Unless anybody else wants to come in, then I think I've counted up 3 things to potentially recommend. So taking them in order that we got them, on flooding, I would wish to recommend that we should be clear as to where the deeming of unsuitability is coming from, and
we've agreed,
and add text clarifying what may or may not happen in the future relating to the actual effects of OFAS and what that may or may not do to future planning applications trying to make the case for residential, and basically being clear that we are currently, I'll rephrase this, being clear that we are stating the position as it is now and the potential for change in the future. Secondly, being clear that the boundary of the area that we're talking about doesn't include the Earl Street car park, and I think that's it actually. Unless anybody can think of anything that I've missed out. All right. In that case, unless anybody wishes to object, I suggest we make those 2 recommendations and move along. Everybody seems happy? All right, brilliant. Thank you all very much indeed. All right, we are moving along to item number 7 about the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. So we have Councillor Thomas with us, and I was told to expect Matthew Peachy on Zoom. Do you know if do we have him? Pardon me? Just calling him. Okay. He has been. Oh, I see, right. Shall I give him a minute to become available?
Chris, can I just point out one thing?
Yes, please.
Did you get apologies from Tiago Cure?
I'm not aware of any apologies from Tiago, but if you'd like to note them now. Yes.
And Anna Railton, but I think that's Jemima's.
I'm definitely well aware of Anna's apologies. Yeah. We had advance apologies from Councillor Railton and Coyne. I hadn't heard anything from Councillor Carrai, but thank you very much for conveying that. We have Mr. Peachy. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. And we also have Councillor Thomas in the room. So yes, as I mentioned, the topic is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. The way I've phrased that, I feel like I'm about to say you have a minute, go. Councillor Thomas, if you'd like to please introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So brought to you by the Levelling Up white paper, we have the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and as a result of that, we have the UK Shared Prosperity Fund investment plan, which is a mouthful, as all my reports seem to be. This is joint between Susan and I. There will be the reason it comes under mine is because, as you'll see from the report, we're looking at spending a fair amount in the city centre, and the city centre action plan falls under my remit. And also because, like everything the council does, we've built in our climate net zero ambitions to what we're doing. So again, relevant to my portfolio. We've got Matt on Zoom, very good reason. So hopefully you can help with some of the technical detail, and I'll do my best with the bits that are more in Susan's remit. So in April, we had the prospectus published by the government, which gave us guidelines on the sort of things they were looking for our investment plan. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund is a pot of money that we didn't have to bid against other councils for. Other councils got similar sized pots, some slightly bigger. So nice that it wasn't competitive, I suppose. Built within that was about 4% support delivery, up to 4% support delivery as an option. We also get, the modest amount is 1 million, but you might in some places see 1,020,000. And for clarity, the 20,000 is given to us to help us get to where we are now. So some of the processes to consult, to draft it, and to support us putting together our investment plan come into that amount. So it's a small pot of funding, which meant that our focus was on keeping administrative costs down and the complexity low. And we have a relatively short time frame to develop. We've had a short time frame to develop the programme. So on the 1st of August, we submitted this investment plan. And you probably will have got something in your inbox saying decision taken, which was a delegated decision to officers. We selected the projects that we went for, which you've seen in the report, based on them being simple, being deliverable programs, and building on strong existing foundations, because as I say, it's a relatively small pot of money, so you don't want to spend a lot of resources on getting the thing going. So resources, capacities and partnerships already in place were very much things we were looking at. And also we're looking for opportunities to leverage match funding from partners. So that's influenced some of the decisions we've taken here. There was quite extensive engagement, all told. So ahead of submitting our indicative investment plan for the prospectus, we engaged with internal stakeholders to develop a long list of ideas. We then tested and refined these with groups such as the Economic Growth Steering Board, the Oxford Strategic Partnership, Oxford Inclusive Economy Partnership, and then we held wider stakeholder workshops. So this had 13 organisations attending, such as Aspire, Activate Learning, CAG Oxfordshire. I have a list if people are interested. So it was a fair amount of engagement that happened after it was announced. But I'd also like to highlight that this is coming off the back of extensive consultation done on the Oxford Economic Strategy and the City Centre Action Plan. And I think that's the real strength, because we already knew that there were gaps that in funding that we needed to find funding for, and we already knew that there was an appetite for some of the schemes we're going for. So things that came up again and again in the process of consulting on the City Centre Action Plan were things like the lack of shared public realm, high rents and rates for new business. So we have an opportunity here to really deliver on those gaps and those things that residents rightly highlighted as problems. So yeah, we've already had that kind of wider engagement from the public and from scrutiny as well on things like the City Centre Action Plan. So I'll just quickly go through a couple of headlines. If you look at page 60 to 61, you'll see them. We have projects such as looking at St Michael's, so a focus on pedestrianisation, which is good in terms of our active travel and safety aims, and promotes good health and also is good for the environment. We have 3 different work streams on community wealth building as well, which is something that's come up, I know, in this committee when I was a backbencher. So this is looking at really keeping wealth within, growing business within Oxford, keeping wealth, keeping skills within Oxford, and really investing in bridging that skills gap, because we have a real gap in attainment in a city that's famed for having, amazing academic attainment credentials. We actually have people in Oxford born and bred, leaving school with low or no qualifications, and really an opportunity here with green jobs to invest in our people of Oxford and make sure they're not lost to, not being priced out of their own city potentially. Along the, I was talking about active travel, so I'll just highlight the wayfinding upgrades as well, because I think that's something that doesn't get talked about with wayfinding, is that it is a good way to promote public transport and active travel. So again, aligns with our green ambitions. The covered market side of things comes into what we heard, what I was talking about earlier about the City Centre Action Plan, in terms of we heard about high rents and rates for new businesses being a problem for starting out businesses, for smaller businesses starting out. So some of our covered market schemes try and address that with options such as low rent, short term, pop-up, and meanwhile uses being put forward. And we retrofit skills as well, I should have mentioned before, when I was talking about green skills. One of the projects that we're proposing here is a green skills programme, which will help to deliver our energy efficiency improvements to our housing stock, and potentially fund direct training, which, as I say, can be a way of tackling inequality as well. So I just wanted to stress that while a lot of these projects on the face of it look like they're focusing on the city centre, which I think some people have the idea of as being quite a wealthy part of town, actually, if you look in Carfax, you find some of the areas with some of the most in the bottom 20% in terms of being most deprived in the country. And also some of the initiatives we're doing in the city centre And some of these schemes are really affecting people living in the city more broadly that we've heard from, that the city centre isn't attractive to them. So I think there's a broader point about inequality, and I think this really does take into account kind of the areas of deprivation across the city and not just in the city centre. So that's something to highlight as well. But yep, I'll leave it there, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Matt, do you want to add anything at this point, or should we move straight on to questions?
I think Imogen's done a great job there of covering the key points. I think the only thing to say is that this is a relatively new fund with a new set of processes, so we have to get used to that. It's obviously intended to replace European structural investment funds, which were larger for Oxfordshire. We had 19 million across Oxfordshire for the previous programme, so we're trying to do something with slightly less money. And I think the other thing to flag is that this funding is backloaded. It's 1 million over 3 years, and we have around 723,000 coming forward in 24-25. So a lot of the bigger stuff we would like to do is going to have to be developed for that year. But on things like green skills and retrofit skills, that probably works quite well, because we do have that requirement to understand what we need to do in terms of our own building stock, and then to commission that and to make sure we get the supply chain in place, and to hopefully attract more match funding. So whilst it could be seen as a negative that we don't have that funding until later, it does give us a little bit of flexibility to develop the programme further and hopefully have more impact. And so that's a key element of this, that let's look at where other investment is happening and use this funding to lever in more money on top, because it's a relatively small portion. Oxford got 1 million. A lot of the other places in Oxfordshire got 1 million. Cherwell got 1.25. Places like Preston have got 5 million, for example. So we're trying to, I think we need to try and do as much as we can with a relatively small portion of funding, but still nonetheless welcome funding.
Thank you very much. Okay, who would like to ask questions? I see Councillors Pegg and Belly Summers, and we haven't had Councillor Rowley yet in the whole meeting, so why don't you go first?
Thank you, Chair. There might not be a complete answer to this yet, because I'm well aware, obviously, of how funding criteria appear at very short notice, because everything that happens between Parliament Square and Trafalgar Square is chaos, basically. But looking at page 62, paragraph 27, how will we constitute the, to the extent that we know, how will we constitute the programme board? Who will be represented on it, and how will that be accountable to this to councillors and to the local authority?
Matt might have more on that. I know it's in the reports, but I think maybe that's one for Matt.
Yeah, happy to answer that. Yeah, we again feel this should be relatively light touch. Of course, it does need to be accountable. We'll look to report on the programme on an annual basis. We'll be reporting to government with a detailed report every 6 months, which will cover spend. It will cover a narrative against delivery. It will cover any issues that there are in delivery in terms of level of risk. There'll be a risk register as part of that, where we report against each of the projects that are in the plan over that 3-year period. So essentially, we'll look to replicate that, the reporting periods within the SPF board. So probably a meeting every 3 to 6 months. We know that we'll need finance support. We know that we'll need colleagues from the Regen and Economy team. We'll also bring in colleagues from other parts of the council that will be involved in delivery. So we've worked very closely with our sustainability team in terms of the retrofit skills. So we'll need to make sure we've got the right colleagues available for that. And it's possible that we will need some legal support as well. We haven't yet agreed the contract with government, of course. We haven't yet heard from government whether we have an approved investment plan, but we do expect to hear from them this month and possibly to have the money paid in this month. So once we hear back from government, we expect to need to set that up pretty quickly. And it's as I said, it's a relatively small amount of funding. We've got a number of busy officers. I think it's just about finding the balance around, of course, having the right governance and accountability, but not taking up officers' time for unnecessary process. So that's the balance we need to strike, I think.
Any follow-up there?
Sorry, only to it's a small amount of money compared to our annual budget, but it is up to £1 million, and the objectives are fairly important. So I hope that the periodic reports that are mentioned will either come here or at least go to the cabinet member for review in some form.
Okay, that sounded forthright enough that we should probably inscribe that as a recommendation, if that was your intent.
I'd welcome that. Thank you.
Cool, fantastic. Do we need phrasing on that, or did we get the gist well enough to write that down? Okay, fantastic, excellent. I will go to Councillor Pegg, please.
Yeah, this is probably just a really quick one, but when we're talking about wayfinding stuff, I assume that basically means signposts. What is it that you're actually planning to do?
Yeah, there's a lot in this actually. Probably a supplementary thing to look at and to go away with is in the city centre action plan. We have a bit on that, but I can pick this up with you if it's an area of interest. But it's actually not just signposts. It's everything that makes it easier to navigate a city. And actually, there are a lot of ways people do this now. Apps are becoming increasingly important, and it can be useful for people with different needs as well. If you have accessibility needs, if you need to find somewhere to charge an electric vehicle, having good websites, having good apps are ways to kind of consolidate some of this information and to make it easier to be a pedestrian. I was in a city that won't be named this weekend for a climate course, and it was so difficult to navigate. And I wanted to be a happy pedestrian, but I was a grumpy pedestrian. And the amount I wanted to hail a cab was unreal, because it was just so unpleasant and so hard to find my way. And I didn't want my phone battery to run out before I had to get my coach. It was one of those kind of nightmare situations. And the visitor experience of coming to Oxford without good wayfinding is part of the bread and butter that we need to get right. And we've seen in the past that we've scored highly on heritage, on our cultural offer, on what tourists would like to see, but we've scored lowly compared to other councils on wayfinding. And it's something that's come up in consultation. It came up in the City Centre Action Plan consultation process. So it's something we have a gap in funding with that we really wanted to explore. The officers have put quite a bit of time into already, and now we have that funding. I think it's a really important opportunity to really get to grips with that and think about the ways we can make our city more accessible in terms of navigation, and that can then promote people travelling into the city as a tourist destination on public transport and getting around by foot, by bike, by e-scooter.
Okay, I will come to Councillor Belly-Summers, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, when I read it, I thought it was very city centre centric. And then I read something about Community Wealth Building Enterprise Workstream, which is page 61. So the support will be targeted at the areas of Oxford falling in the 20th most deprived area of the county. Would it be possible to be more specific as to which funding is going to which most deprived area, the 20% most deprived area? Because I hear from Imogen that the town centre is also Carfax. Described as an area of deprivation. So is that possible to be, does it involve Barton? Would it involve Rosehill, Littlemore, Blackbirdleys? Is that possible to be a bit more specific in what you are saying here? That would be really good for lots of residents to know that.
I can add a little bit there and then hand over to Matt, who seems to want to speak as well. So some of the community wealth building work we've already been doing has been in areas like Barton. So Councillor Nala Hartley, you might know, has been involved with Barton Retrofit. That's partially supported by Oxford City Council and by our community wealth building project. So examples of kind of the CWB work we've done have been Blackbird Lees Community Market, as I just mentioned, Barton Community Retrofit Co-op, which you might well know included free training and retrofit and energy saving building techniques, and residents promoting retrofit, being paid the Oxford living wage as well. So that kind of job opportunity there as well in a part of the city that many people are more vulnerable in. The Wellbeing Cooperative, the Oxford Community Action Kitchen, African Families in the UK, these are all kind of social community enterprises that Owned by Oxford has been working with. So it's these sorts of schemes and these kind of community employment plans, I think, are things we really need to push on to make sure that businesses are really seeing their responsibility to the city and to scale up the population. So that's some of the community wealth building work that could be done that could benefit multiple different areas across the city. But I don't know if Matt has anything to say on the detail of that.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of the areas I would have covered, Councillor Thomas. Thank you. It is if we are looking to build on the work that has been started through Owned by Oxford, which does have a geographical focus on Rose Hill, on Littlemore, on Barton and Blackbird Leys. Of course, it does engage with the groups in other parts of the city, but has favoured those areas and is trying to support activity in those areas. We had funding through Friends Provident, which was led by Community Action Group Oxford, for the Owned by Oxford project. That project runs through until later this year, and we're looking to build on that. So really, it is about building on that project. We've seeded a number of organisations through that. We've also used funds such as our Build Back Better grant fund to fund organisations like Co-op Futures to support groups in those areas. So we're trying to build a network of organisations that are becoming enterprises and community-owned enterprises, and trying to build a network of support for those as well. I think when we were looking at all the options with this 1 million of funding, we were presented with the option to provide a range of different business support programs to a range of different businesses, and we felt that a lot of those would be better delivered either directly by the LEP or by the private sector. So we're trying to fund and support those areas where it's most needed, where the resource is least available, and where there is a real need to try and develop a group of enterprises that can address local needs and address local ownership of economic opportunities. So really it is about building on it in the areas that need it most.
No, I'll come to you in just a second. Can I just clarify on the same topic? When we say supporting those organisations, do we mean directly funding them, or is there something else that what in practice are we doing or proposing to do rather in order to support them?
Yeah, so through the obviously through the previous programme I just mentioned, funded by Friends Provident, we did have some funding directly to provide to those businesses, and also through the Build Back Better Fund, which was funded by the COVID recovery grants. So the aim with this programme is to make sure we've got some officer resource dedicated towards community wealth building, so they can work with the community, they can work with businesses, they can look at other sources of funding that are out there through organisations such as Friend Provident or others, and really stimulate more of this work. So it's about having the resource in place in terms of staffing within the economic development team to work with the community and spearhead a lot of this. It's about us working in partnership with the third sector to achieve those goals on an ongoing basis. So it will be about building on the resource that this allows us to put in place, and making sure we continue to have community wealth building officer support within the economic development team.
So I hate to be a broken record, but there's a lot of uses of working with in that description. But I'm still not clear what that means in practice. What are officers actually doing day to day? Is what I'm asking.
Yeah, so we have an officer working directly with the Owned by Oxford programme, supporting the development of the grant schemes, supporting the development of those projects such as the African Caribbean pop-up market, working with licensing, working with other team members to try and establish support for those businesses. So it is about ensuring that there is grant funding support. It's about helping those businesses with regulatory issues. It's about pointing them to other sources of business support, such as the cooperative futures. So some of the things those officers have done day to day are ensure we've got cooperative futures business support here in the Oxford area, where we didn't have that previously. Ensuring we've set up a grant scheme that supports community-owned businesses, ensuring we're helping those businesses understand some of the regulatory requirements to get set up, and making connections with other wider networks of support that are available. So, for example, you'll have OXLEP, Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership Business Support as well. So it's about trying to bring all of that together for support. The project Owned by Oxford is one that we work together with those organisations to get funded. So we work with CAG Oxfordshire, we work with Make Space, We work with the partners such as Social Solidarity Economy Oxford to put that funding bid in and to make sure it was successful. We'll look to do more of that, working with those types of organisations.
Okay, I will probably grill Councillor Thomas after the meeting because I still don't think I understand, but I should get out of the way. Councillor Arshed, don't remember you waved a hand, sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, my question's of a similar nature. I mean, I'm like yourself, very passionate about the local communities, and thank you for this report. I feel that in order to strengthen our ties with grassroots and communities who I work with all the time, I'm also interested, like Councillor Nadine Belly-Summers, about Temple Cowley and East Oxford, the areas of the compact impact zone that don't usually get touched and somehow get less benefit for the area. I have women from BAME backgrounds who come up to me and say, well, you know what, there's nothing happening in our area. How can we be involved when we're, got different language speaking, they've got different cultural barriers, they've got different, things that they would love to get involved with. And I'm just thinking in terms of the, more safer neighbourhoods, for example, Divinity Road. We've got a huge array of students from the Brookes University in different areas, especially in Temple Cowley. I can just see a report that's been sent to me that there's higher crime and theft and break-ins into vehicles. So, those grassroots, and I think, breaking down those barriers for those people. And obviously my question is coming on to like the drilling of how you will get involved in with those people, because those communities are really lacking as post-COVID recovery because of those cultural barriers. They're not able to get out. And obviously with all the new schemes that we're going forward with, I think I could be a real strength to the bridging along with other local councillors for the area, because there are active community grassroots projects that are on ground at the moment, and they're crying out for support, especially with the food poverty since the fuel increase and all those. So if we could tie in that somehow, and if that helps open up the dialogue with you now as an officer, it'd be really helpful if you could reach out to me, or to provide that opportunity of employment for the new generation and the existing one, because I do feel that the representation really is not there for a lot of the BAME communities, and it could really be increased. And I think previously Nigel Chapman and Shaista Aziz were working on something that, for example, we have a job fair in City Centre. How are all the communities and the local champions supposed to know about it, rather than me going searching in Google and say, oh, well, what's on in Oxford Town Hall next? So, really breaking it down, is there anything particular we can do with that? Because I think quite right, the people who are born and bred or who are growing up here, growing up, we really need to bring everybody together going forward. And I think, I know you said that there's a co-op grant, and that's going to be coming up in 2023 spring for the next one. But there needs to be more pots available to these communities who need help with these things. That's all I want to drill down. Thank you.
Thank you, Lubna. No, really, really good points. Really good points. So what you were saying about East Oxford, about Temple Cowley, it's these sorts of areas that we're really trying to address when we're talking about the least developed places needing representation. So things like the retrofit skill, and I am saying this is £1 million. It's not going to solve the problems in Oxford. So we do have to target where we have funding gaps, where we think it aligns with the criteria set by the government, where we already have good consultation to build on, and where it's going to be not so resource intensive. But that said, things like the retrofit skills part of this project will be a good opportunity to train for people to potentially gain employment in low carbon construction techniques that maybe are low skilled or underskilled, and from those from backgrounds that you've mentioned. And again, the community wealth building employment work stream, really trying to invest in skilling up our own workforce rather than having people traveling in, and obviously the carbon footprint that comes with that, with high skills to our city. We actually have so many people in our city that are on the breadline and under, that have so much potential that's unrealised and whose lives are being affected by low incomes. So I think it's that we're really we have an opportunity here to champion the Oxford living wage and to really kind of scale up the population. And I think community wealth building is all about shortening supply chains, keeping wealth within the local economy, having cheaper rent options for local businesses. These things can really make a difference across our city, not just in Barton, Blackbird, Leeds that we mentioned before, but as you said, in East Oxford and Temple Cowley.
Do you want to follow up?
I just wanted to ask group if there should be a recommendation going forward so that we don't end up leaving Temple Cowley, East Oxford out. I don't know if that's, or a drill down on the action points, because I know Councillor Imogen has done a fantastic job, but I think if there needs to be a recommendation, because to ask for further support from the funding, because I know there's 110 million, but is there another way, that the way that we've broken it down, to ask for more from national government?
I don't think we'll be getting more money from national government through this fund, unfortunately. But absolutely, I think we should be aiming to use this funding as a way of stimulating additional support from other organisations. So, as I mentioned, Friends Provident funded this project, the Owned by Oxford project, because it was targeting areas of deprivation, and because we were targeting our diverse population. The OBO project has worked with Damascus Rose Kitchen. It's worked with a potential African Caribbean pop-up market. It's worked with African Families UK. So we are aiming to try and ensure there is support for those groups that do need it most and perhaps are hardest to reach. We'll also, when we worked with other officers to develop this programme, we talked to them about what support was needed, and we'll work very closely with our localities officers in communities as well to try and access those networks. And are very happy to hear from councillors on how to access those networks as well. We won't be targeting solely some areas over another. Resource will be limited, and it will be where there are opportunities to work with groups that won't wish to work with us on this. Absolutely, and that's I think building on the model that's been developed through other organisations as well as ourselves through Owned by Oxford.
Yeah, and I'd just add one thing to what Matt said, which is, and actually building on what he said earlier, the fact that it's backdated to year 3 means we actually do have the opportunity, when we're getting less money at the beginning, to kind of say, this is what we're doing to attract the extra funding. And then even after the end of this money, we then have we have schemes to say, this is what we do when we have the money. This is how it works. This is the value, the social value we can build by investing in Oxford's communities. And that then in turn could help us with future funding bids. So it doesn't need to end here. And I think it's really important from the outset to think about our broader ambition. So thank you, Lubna.
Okay. I suggest let's try to, you're asking for a formal recommendation, let's try and put that together at the end, because I think we'd need to take a moment to figure out what exactly it should say. Right now, sorry, I know I've got Councillor Hunt waiting, Councillor Altaf Khan and Councillor Belly Summers, so I'll come to Councillor Hunt next, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a few things really building on what we're discussing. I think it's fantastic that we're focusing on the city centre and how to get communities from around Oxford, many of which never visit the city centre, as we know, they never visit the universities, the museums. This is an ongoing conversation. My first question was to Matt, just to clarify, did you say that previously, probably before 2016, there was a European pot and 19 million was available for this type of funding, which now obviously the national government's just giving you 1 million, which, just for the record, was that the figure that you gave?
Yes, just for the record, it's difficult to compare like for like, but for Oxfordshire, we had 19 million of European structural investment funds over the programme period of 7 years. If I look across Oxfordshire, I think we've got about 5.2 million across all of the districts over 3 years. So it's it's potentially comparable but slightly smaller.
I mean, so just connecting them with what we're trying to do overall, my thoughts were that building on what's happening with Broad Street is very important, whether that should be a recommendation, but certainly, you know, there is a certain amount of funding that's going in there. It's an 18-month trial. It needs to be made permanent. I think the more, you know, onus on trying to bring local communities into that part of the city so they can then visit the museums and so on. If there's a way of joining that up, I think that would be very useful. Secondly, a conversation we're having at the moment with, well, yes, the university, I think, is key in all of this. And whether the university is a partner, when you talk about match funding, are you talking about the university? And also, as a point, I'm very involved in active travel. We're, you know, starting a conversation about getting a cycle lane through university parks, which I think, again, is very much about trying to use the public realm, trying to use the spaces within Oxford for all of us, so that there isn't, again, this exclusive access for some, i.e. through the university spaces, and not for others. And I think that's, you know, should be part of this conversation about how we refocus and reset the city centre.
Thank you, Jemima. On Broad Street, I actually work on Broad Street, so I guess I'll declare an interest there. But I'm really excited by what's going on. I really enjoyed Broadmeadow. I was there when they set it up, actually. I got to work and it was kind of a construction site. I came out on my tea break and they were just putting the trees in. And I came out on lunchtime and it was like it had been there for weeks. There were children playing, there were people eating their lunch, and it was just such a natural space. And the whole point of some of these city centre actions we're talking about is to let people take the streets back a bit and to slow down the pace, which is really good for Oxford small businesses. You've seen the Italian place, which started up, I think, in the pandemic on Broad Street, that really, I think, benefited from having the outdoor seating right next to it. It's a difficult time to start up, but they did really well, I think. You know, you see queues outside there all the time, and it's great food as well. So that's what I like to see more of. I like to see greener, more pedestrian friendly. And I would draw attention to some of the, obviously it's £1 million. We can't do everything on our wish list. We've tried to find gaps, and we've already kind of got Broad Street underway. But the Market Street commitments are very much part of that vision for Broad Street, because we want to be seeing more cargo bike deliveries to Gloucester Green Market. That's what the partial pedestrianisation is about. And at the moment, Market Street is essentially a glorified car park. So I would really like to see Market Street, and that's exactly what we're doing in the City Centre Action Plan. And you know, if you look on page 60, 61, you'll see that that Market Street, or that, St Michael's covered market design and feasibility. So some of those covered market improvements include improvements to Market Street, and that might be where the money's spent. Having talked to Matt about this before, I don't know if you can add more detail there. Sorry, once before I pass over to him, on the university and potential match funding. I don't know anything specific on this, but I would say that part of the community wealth building kind of vision is to really put pressure on anchor institutions to think about how they're contributing to a city. So the university, in some ways, as a big landlord, has a responsibility, and also is potentially responsible for a lot of inequality in housing and this sort of thing. So there is an argument there, I think, that the university should give back and should be thinking about its impact on the city. So I think you're right to bring that up, and I hope that whether it's as part of this or as part of our broader community wealth building initiative as it takes off, we are able to really have those difficult conversations with our anchor institutions and change the narrative there, I think. And sorry, I'll hand over to Matt now.
Yeah, again, I think you've said most of it. I think for example, the covered market is a good example, isn't it? We're consulting on the master plan for the covered market at the moment. Jesus College have obviously invested in Northgate House. There will be some future investment in the public realm around Market Street, and hopefully some of the shared prosperity funding can go together with that investment that there's been from Jesus College. There may be other opportunities to do that through the city centre, but of course there is a relatively small amount of money. But where there are opportunities to, for example, add to the investment that other landowners are going to put in place, then we should certainly do that. And of course, we as a landowner, assuming we can make the business case, will invest in the covered market. So this is about adding to that investment and then that of nearby landowners. We will work very closely with each of the colleges that do own retail premises in and around the city centre for the covered market, for example, and we'll look to make the case to them that there is a good case to invest in the sort of historic retail core of Oxford. So with the covered market coming forward, with St Michael Street coming forward, hopefully subject to finding the funding and the feasibility, meaning they can be done. That's the council using its own funding. It's using government funding to show that there's investment happening in the city centre. And we'd certainly encourage other landowners to do the same.
Thank you. Did you want to follow up with any of that, or is that cool? Alrighty. Sorry, you mentioned, I remember right near the beginning, you mentioned perhaps wanting a formal recommendation around relating to Broad Street. Are you sort of satisfied with the answer you've had? Do you want to put some of that into a recommendation?
I mean, on reflection, I think it would actually be much more relevant to try and word something around the role of the university, because I think actually if there's some bigger conversation to be had about the way in which all of these schemes, initiatives, in Cambridge, for example, the way I don't know how things run here, but there's something called the Greater Cambridge Partnership, and you can see very transparently on the website, City, County, University, and you can see all their schemes, all their programs, what they're doing, what they're setting up. And I've always felt that's something that's missing here in Oxford, the way in which our, strategic partnerships are run. So if there's some way in which we can talk about the university being a key partner in a scheme such as this, that might be useful.
Do you want? Should we come back at the end to how that could be phrased? Because I'm not sure I can see right now how to word it. But if you could venture something later on, that would be very useful. I will come to Councillor Altaf Khan, please.
We talked about the funding, and I wonder why the other district got more than the city, which is very urban, very diverse, and quite a lot of movement and things going on here. So wasn't this case made where I think Matthew said 1.2, another district got in Oxfordshire, and 5 million Preston got. So Oxford had a more stronger case, I think, than Preston or any other districts in the city. So that's my first comment. My second is, I can see the objectives and things is being talked and trying to get it done, but I do seriously think that this is a very small amount of money and quite a bigger tasks and bigger things. So, and we're trying to touch upon a number of areas, a number of things with this little amount. So that would be seen as very much a piecemeal approach, because we wouldn't be able to sort even one thing, say, if we talk about the cleaner air. So like Birmingham, Southampton have got this cleaner air zone, which will not be just by doing one street or bit of things. I don't think we will achieve that. And my other point on that is that whatever is happening at this time in the city, and especially a drive about the reducing cars and journeys of car and making city and the streets back to people, as is being called, and people want streets back. So I know Lubna talked about quite a bit about the diverse communities and the BME communities. To my knowledge, majority of them, I wouldn't say how many, but support, but majority are opposing whatever is happening. LTN, bus gates, Broad Street, you name it, they're all opposing. So I doubt it very much that they would be beneficiary or trying to be on board of everything what is happening. And partly I don't think is they're just anti, but I don't think they were properly taken on board and properly being seriously considered as a community. 33% of population, is nowhere on the statutory consultees bodies or any of the groups being talked about or consulted and getting them on board. So I personally do see here very seriously, this is a just head-on fight against the people who are anti-car and people who have the cars. So this is like a just, and I would use this word, is like becoming like a very much a personal vendetta. Each other is not taking communities on the board and what trying to be achieved. So with this funding, my view is a very little amount and very big things we're trying to climb up. So I think a case should have been made as a diverse city, very big community populations. And I had a figure before COVID from the over tourist department. I think number of millions of people come and go in this city. So it never happens like Preston or any of the districts. I mean, how many millions would, sorry to say, but Whitney or Carterton or Abingdon, but the more people visit the city. So for that reason, I think this is funding is one of the issue, and then the objectives with what we're trying to do. And third is about the community's engagement, communities on board.
I think community engagement is very important, and we've seen from this committee a lot of brilliant recommendations on how we can be reaching more people in our communities in our consultation processes. The City Centre Action Plan was very, very widely consulted on at multiple stages and had a really, really strong response. Broad Street separately was also consulted upon, and there was overwhelming support in the consultation process for pedestrianisation. And I don't think it's at all relevant to talk about L2Yens in this conversation. This funding is nothing to do with those transport schemes. Broad Street specifically isn't mentioned either, but Jemima brought up a relevant question about city centre space and about stay time and things like that, I think come into that. In terms of people having a pleasanter, kind of more sit-down experience in the city centre, which is good for the local economy, which was relevant, I think, to part of what we are talking about here, which is the covered market master plan, which is under consultation at the moment. And I'd encourage everybody here to go out in their communities and get everybody to fill in the consultation while they can. But some of the funding may be used for the Market Street ambitions. At the moment, it's an unpleasant frontage to the covered market, which traders have fed back to us is problematic because people don't want to go to the covered market. That, you know, they might not notice it. They might just be, it's all thoroughfare. It's people trying to get where they're going rather than staying for a second and going, oh, I might pop into the market because it's quite pleasant here. So if we can rationalise our deliveries, and that doesn't mean get rid of all vans, but it's a delivery, it's a loading bay at the moment. So if we think about the timing of our deliveries and also, the method of our deliveries, I'm completely clear that it's a good thing if we're moving towards cargo bikes, if we're moving away from fossil fuels in our deliveries where we can. I think the attack on cars conversation is not one for this report. It's nothing to do with what we're talking about here. But I do take the point, and it's an important one, that we always need to be looking to how we diversify the responses to our consultations.
Okay, I had Councillor Belly-Summers on the list, and
Thank you, Chair.
please go ahead, and anybody else who wants to come in, please wave.
Sorry if you don't mind, just a quick follow-up. The point I made in my initial, they were discussed here, and that's why I made those. They are not part of this report. I know very well, and I've read this report, and I've made a number of questions on this report. When we try to talk with the broader pictures and say, we want street backs to people, we want cycles and Michaels this, we want covered market this, we want supporting Broad Street, then the picture goes wider about the other scheme and other impact in the city and how the communities are behaving towards it. So that was my point.
Okay, Councillor Belly-Summers, please.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm completely agreeing with Lubna, and we should have a specific recommendation regarding OX4, which is Cowley, a little more area, because there is nothing specific here about. What I heard, Matthew, is if there are projects, for example, in Barton or Blackburleys, and there is some money that is going to be allocated to them. I know 1 million is it's just like a piecemeal, but there is nothing specific about OX4, and yet it is in a 20% most deprived area of the country. I mean, it's not kind of revolutionary to say that. So it is almost like if this conversation we have to mention the type of grassroots organization who could benefit from this, but we haven't been consulted. That comes from you, not from us. So basically, we would want to have a specific recommendation on where this money can go in the OX4 area, which involve these two areas that I mentioned. It's not up to us to tell you where the money could go, to which grassroots organization. You should tell us where it should go, to benefit these areas. Because this is what you are saying. Support will be targeted at the area of Oxford, falling in the 20% most deprived area. So I want something more specific here in the recommendation in this meeting.
So Councillor Arshad, did you want to follow up? Or? Press the button.
Yes, thank you. I would like, I mean, Imogen has been very thorough, but I think we can go one step forward as a committee to recommending for OX4, with employment opportunities or training programs, so we could just put a line in. And the other side would be a recommendation to perhaps get suggestions from councillors, not those groups who are just only currently grassroots projects, but those who would like to be coming in or are left out, so that all voices are heard. That's all. And I know you are doing that through Thriving Communities. However, I do feel that there's some groups that, on feedback, who are being left. Yeah.
I just wanted to draw attention to the timescale a little bit, which is that the investment plan's gone to government already in August. But what we do have some flexibility at, this is quite high level, what we've got here. It's not a detailed kind of play-by-play of what we're going to be doing. So in terms of delivery, there's a lot of flexibility. So a recommendation around where we might want to look to focus and not make sure is not left out in delivery would be welcome.
Okay, so how about trying to draw this together a bit? How about a phrasing along the lines of that the Cabinet should examine and draw out examples of how this spending can be used to support all areas of the city? Does that work? I lost confidence in that as I got halfway through it. But can anybody improve on that? Okay, Councillor.
Would it help to say, for the report to be specifying what that 20% area is? Is that what a recommendation could be, to specify what the 20% is?
As a point of information, they're published on the website. There is a report on the indices of multiple deprivation. It's published in 2019, which is the statistics, the latest statistics, which are referred to in this report.
I see. Okay. So, oh God, how am I going to say this?
It would be helpful if you mentioned OX4, because that does cover a big area of Blackburleys. It covers an area of little more
deprived area.
Yes, please.
I just asked for some clarification, just exactly. So what is your recommendation more general? So for any project coming forward, or on this one in particular? I'm not quite clear on that.
So the funding, is all right, Chair? Yeah. The funding for Thriving Communities and the funding for grassroots projects, and to interlink the job opportunities and the training, we're saying that we somehow get dropped off because Barton, Rosehill, Blackburleys tend to take, because it comes in higher deprivation of the area. And what I and Nadine are saying is that Littlemore and Timber Cowley, including East Oxford, which is East Oxford, somehow there are groups who are operating there who would like to have part of the funding so that they can help integrate to get those people who can't get jobs, for example, their frustration is reduced, and so that it's giving back to the communities for people who are having difficulty, not just filling out application forms for the funding pots currently. It's breaking down those barriers.
Can I make a suggestion for a recommendation then? How about if we said something along the lines of ensuring that community organisations and groups in all areas, I think is Littlemore not on the...
Minchery Farm is, yes.
Okay.
Minchery Farm Estate. 20%. The Minchery Farm Estate, parts of the Rose Hill, Barton, Blackbird Leys and Greater Leys.
Okay, so how is this Minchery Farm being targeted with the funding? Is there anything there or explore?
I don't know if we're getting a bit. Are we getting? I mean, I might be getting confused. I'm quite tired, but are we getting a bit confused between the point that Councillor Thomas was making about the areas of Carfax which are within areas of deprivation, and the point that some of it the
city centre objectives, that there are two 20%. So yeah, that is true, but also the community wealth building enterprise work stream, which is one of the 3 work streams, will target the areas of Oxford falling in the 20 most deprived areas in the county. If there are a recommendation that the delivery of the investment plan were to make sure to consider OX4 and Temple Cowley within, some of those community wealth building, that would be completely understandable.
I don't know if I completely get where you're coming from, but if we're using carefully retrieved data to choose the areas that are within the 20 most deprived, I personally feel like that's maybe quite a good metric to use, but maybe we could sort of put something in about making sure, I guess, that we're considering different indices and axes of deprivation when we're making that decision, but not necessarily deviating from that, because it seems to me like quite a fair and redistributive way to do it. But
so how about, I'll come to Councillor Pegg in just a moment. I've seen your hand. Sorry. How about, because I'm a little bit wary of specifically naming parts of the city, just because it would be very reasonable for any other ward to say, what, I wasn't in the room to bang the drum for my specific locality, and the councillor for Northfield Brook will be at me. So how about to explore and report upon ways in which the funding can be used can be focused upon those areas of the city which are the most deprived. I suspect it may also already do so to a significant degree, in which case it would just be a case of setting out in black and white how this is done, and that this is a guiding principle. Does that sound okay? Yeah. People broadly happy with that? Yes. Well, I was just going to say deprived, but I guess that is saying the same thing, I think. Okay, right. All right. Now we only. Sorry, I'll come to you in just a second. I know. Did you still want to come in, Councillor Pegg?
I was just going to suggest some wording for recommendations, so you've already done that. So
okay, fantastic. Thank you. We had Councillor Hunt's recommendation also to finalise. Would you like to hazard any phrasing for that?
I don't want to get the language wrong, but it's whether to ensure or invite, or it's about the participation of the university, as I don't know whether it's match funding or whether it's strategic partnerships, but what we're trying to say is that they have a role to play here, and we want them at the table, and we want them to be funding various initiatives within the city centre, but we obviously can't be completely specific.
Councillor Dickens.
I think I would suggest maybe it's not the most productive use of a recommendation to the cabinet to ask them to get the university to give us money, because that's not something that, as much as I'm sure Councillor Thomas wishes she had control over that, I'm not sure it's actually ultimately something she does. But maybe making sure that, again, we're exploring all avenues
No, we've
to
got to use the word university, that's the whole point.
yeah, can we just let me finish? Exploring all avenues to getting the university on board and engaged with schemes, this scheme and schemes such as this, particularly schemes such as this, which are heavily involved in the city centre.
I think funding should be part of it. I mean, what we're trying to discuss,
And funding, and we could put funding where possible.
funding now that we've paid.
If I
Can I
just
come
add a point,
I know,
that's okay.
I know Matt wants to come in, so can I come to Matt and then I'll come to Councillor Arshad and then we'll try and wrap up. Matt, please.
Thank you. Yeah, the university are a member of the Oxford Economic Growth Board, and they engage with that fully. They engage with the process of developing this proposal and this investment plan, and we'll continue to work with them. So, for example, on something like retrofit skills, the expertise from the university could be very valuable. On wayfinding around the visitor economy, we'll need their expertise in terms of how we make sure we're guiding visitors to the right parts of the city, so they'll have an engagement on that. Where perhaps they're a landowner in parts of, for example, the West End, as the city expands, we'll look to engage with them on that to ensure there is a match funding approach, and we're certainly already doing that in the West End. Where there are colleges in the city centre that are investing alongside ourselves, again, that's where we've got the opportunities to build in match funding. We've got those networks in place, and we're certainly seeking that as a guiding principle of this funding. It's already a principle, essentially, that we'll look to do so. We would look to engage with the key partners in the city that have a stake in its development, and we'll continue to do so. So I don't want to say it doesn't need a recommendation, but it's certainly part of the way we're already working.
Councillor Arshad, please.
Yeah, so I just going on what you've just said and what Councillor Jemima Hunt has said is if they can, Oxford University can help further with the development and the community spaces, or how you want to word it, but just do it generously.
Continue to. I mean, just something that just underlines,
yeah,
our appreciation for their support and looking forward to ongoing support, just so it's part of what we expect. And moving forward, we're hoping to, bring them in more.
Please do finish.
Thank you, Chair. I also wanted to, I don't know if this is the right point to put it in, but we were talking about spaces for all communities, and I just wanted to waive it because I do think it's very relevant, is that there's lack of spaces for children in the city centre and things for children to do. So while I just wanted to put that point in.
Okay, thank you. I know I had Councillor Altaf Khan waiting to speak, and then we'll try and sum up.
It's not only one university, we have two universities, and we have the BMW car factory and a number of other people who might be part of this growth board, I'm not too sure, and working with the other partners delivering this program where this council can benefit. That would be some sort of recommendation that might not get the money, but somehow if they are on board, there are a number of things could happen. A vice chancellor for Oxford University called Chaz told me some time ago that they had about 16 million or something technology investment, and let me know what else we can do for the city. And they talk about this amount there that they've been investing. So as getting them on board, I think universities and the car manufacturers and that sort of people delivering when we're trying to increase the young people's opportunities to work and engage and that sort of thing. I think the recommendation should be on that line, that the cabinet look at or explore the way of working more closely. And when you are working more closely, obviously you should ask that we need funds, not only just your talk and advice. So that's the, I think, way to do.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Thomas, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Matt was saying, that the universities have been, as he said, the Economic Growth Steering Board was part of, and as I said in my initial report, were part of the initial process of, looking at the long list of ideas and have been involved since the start. And as he says, and Councillor Altaf Khan points out that we have an opportunity that, we could be getting more from them, not just in terms of advice, but I think some of the skills we could get in terms of retrofit are valuable. These things have weight to them, and there are kind of funding opportunities built into that structure, but that doesn't preclude a recommendation about strengthening that.
Okay, great. So it sounds like if a recommendation were made here, it would probably have structure kind of similar to the previous one, and would look something along the lines of, explore and report on opportunities to. I would say something like cooperate with partner institutions in the delivery of the plan, rather than calling out specifically the university, because as Altaf mentions, there are 2 universities and other educational institutions to consider, and yada yada yada. You see what I mean? There's always going to be other things that we're missing out. The question is, do we want to venture the recommendation, or do we want to take? I mean, both Matt and Councillor Thomas have, essentially asserted that this is a thing already done and not something that needs to be the subject of a recommendation. So I think probably at this point, let's show some hands. So those who are minded that we should venture that recommendation, would you please show a hand? So yeah, please.
Working other partners.
Okay, I see a trickle of raising hands, rising eventually to a majority, which is just how I like my votes. So, so it should always consist of looking at the person next to you and thinking, oh really? Okay. In any case, I'm sure it will be at least a harmless recommendation, which will yield some explanatory text, which will reassure councillors who are wanting to be better informed on the topic. All right. Yes, please, Richard.
Are the recommendations to Cabinet to amend anything that's in the report, or as a sort of aspiration going forward in general terms?
I mean, I don't think amending sensible, considering this was already submitted to government on the 1st of August.
That was my confusion.
Yes. I would imagine is there a distinction between the submission that's been made to government and the report that goes to Cabinet for them to approve, and that report can contain explanation but this is obviously distinct. And as you mentioned, that the specifics of how things are done and deployed in the near future have not been pinned down. So I would see it as a case of both reporting in text and then considering how that can be applied to the deployment of these resources. Does that make sense? Okay, right. In that case, I think we're in a position to draw a line under this item. So let us move along to the budget review group. This one, I will please hand over to Richard to just briefly introduce this year's budget review group process.
On the 5th of July, as you'll all remember, but before I started, you approved the creation of the budget review group, which happens every year, and that you approved that the members of the Finance and Performance Panel would form the budget review group. The scope is in the pack and is very similar to last year and most years before that. And so you're invited to approve it.
Thank you. And I realise I forgot to thank Councillor Thomas. Thank you very much. I believe Matt has gone, so please pass on my thanks and apologies for my rudeness in not doing so. Right. Yes, that being said, thank you very much for the introduction. Does anybody wish to make any comments at this point, or are we happy to approve the recommendation to establish the budget review group as set out in the agenda? I see noddings of heads. Excellent. All right, in which case that brings us to the report back on recommendations. You may note that we've had responses from the Cabinet universally. I think I should check whether that's a first in Scrutiny Committee history, but we have a lot of accepted, agreed recommendations relating to both the reports considered in the previous meeting. We have some slight amendments to the Housing and Homelessness Panel's recommendations, specifically to just, which doesn't change the meaning, but it's to add, where previously we said that the Council produces a glossary for the consultation so as to make engagement more accessible. That would become that the Council produces a glossary for the strategy document as part of the consultation to make engagement more accessible, just making clear what was being targeted, and that the Council employs the language of residents rather than customers in the strategy has been changed to that it employs the language of residents or service users or citizens, depending on who we're talking about, because it's not always residents, rather than customers in the strategy. So I think those are both what we should consider uncontroversial alterations if the group is happy that they should go by. Excellent. All right. And in which case, finally, that brings us to the dates of the next meeting. The main scrutiny will meet next on the 7th of November. And we note that housing and homelessness was supposed to meet on the 3rd of November, but a date will be changed and is to be arranged with the chair of that panel. And that, I think, is that. So thank you all very much indeed for coming, and have a very nice evening.